Why focusing on upskilling managers is both the right and the wrong answer, or put it another way, why does leadership matter?
Great. So do you want to kick off with that question, Melinda?
Yes, a lot of the work I do is around trying to tackle this issue that I see in organizations, which is I call cultural outsourcing, where the senior leaders of an organization believe that culture is something that somebody else does. And the work I do is trying to bring it back onto the leadership table to help them understand, lean into, make it tangible, not be scared of culture, and really try and pull that lever on organizational success. There's some new research from Gartner that's relatively new, that were kind of like really sort of brought this into sharp relief for me. And the first is they say, so this is looking at this, they were surveying senior HR leaders and they were asking about their views on culture. Now, more than 50% of these senior HR leaders said that leaders in the organization don't feel accountable for the demonstrated desired culture. I'm like, wow, wow, wow. We know this to be the case. This is my work, right? But that figure is just really, really high. And as Edgar Schein, the granddaddy of organizational culture, says, the most important thing that leaders do is manage culture. And they don't even think they're accountable for it. So, of course, they're not going to be leaning into the performance management approach and sort of like bringing culture to life through that mechanism. But the other thing that I think is equally telling, which is about the same number, so slightly more than 50% so of HR leaders say managers fail to enforce, funny word, but we can explore that another time, fail to enforce the desired vision of culture in their teams. So yes, focusing on managers, giving them the skills to look after performance in line with culture are massively important. But whatever you do, don't leave your leaders out of that equation.
So that's so interesting, isn't it? So when I go and talk to organizations about how they want, what changes they're seeking when they say they want to change how they manage performance, I'll often ask the senior leadership, look, when we've done this new thing, whatever this new thing is, whether it's a new framework or a new performance and reward system or whatever it is, what do you want to be different? What are you not getting now that you're seeking? And often there's quite a long pause in all of that. And then they go, oh, that's a good question. And it's as if many leaders think that this thing around performance and culture, and we even now have directors of people and culture. So we have organizationally put performance and culture together as if we do understand that those two things are really, really linked. But that's the job of the director of people and culture. And I have to come back and go, no, the job of the director of people and culture is to enable that in the organization totally, to think about how that can work, to think about how that can support and deliver on the organization vision. But it's the job of the organization and the leaders to say, what culture do we want? Where is my responsibility in that? What performance do we want? And I think what we then see is this huge gap between what leaders think they're leading and what they're actually leading. So a classic and very simple example that we have is when we go in and do lots of work with our frontline employees, and I have a whole team of people who go in and run theatre workshops and all sorts of things with frontline employees. And we say to them, what do you most want from whatever this new approach is? What do you really want? And the most common reply is, I really want to know what's expected of me. I don't know what good looks like. I never really get any feedback. Even if I have a performance conversation, I still come out there going, well, I don't really know where I'm meant to move my performance. And when you then share that with back to the senior leaders, they kind of start rejecting and will be saying things like, of course everybody knows what's going on. Of course they understand. We've been talking about this for ages and ages. But I think we all underestimate, and I'm sure any internal comms professionals on this call will tell us, we all underestimate just how much communication it takes. But also, we don't realize the gap between us saying something and it happening. So when we've had HR people working on a particular topic for a year, they forget that the people that they're then sharing it with, have many other things on their plate and have really only been working on it for for a couple of months or so. And so I did have an extraordinary situation with one leadership team I work with in quite a major financial services organization. And the chief exec and one of the senior directors had done a lot of work on the strategy plan for the next 5 years. And they'd really, really worked on the strategy. And they'd done a strategic presentation to the whole organization. And when I talked to the other 6 members of the executive leadership team, they went, yeah, I know he thinks he's done a strategy, but actually, I don't know what the strategy really is. I don't know what it's meant to mean for me. I'm just getting on running my department. And if that's what the executive leadership team is thinking, it's no wonder that it falls down all the way. So, Belinda, thinking about that leadership and culture, what are some of the things that you might want to do there?
So it's about joining the dots, really, not just not allowing HR and other people teams to get into the cycle of keep creating stuff to fill the gap where change hasn't happened.
Totally.
And we've worked with an organization, well, we've seen all this happen where multiple iterations of values statements and they were going through another round of this. And the idea was we can't call them values again because people are a bit cynical now, so we'll call them something else. But basically it was the same cycle. So I think for me, it's about stopping, thinking, revisiting the leaders about what this actually means and how you're going to do it, and then having a really good and in-depth look at the culture to see where the fit is. An example where that just didn't happen was I was talking to somebody from shortly after the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, and we were talking about the organizational values and how they were used to support performance or direct performance. And they'd been really strong. When the bank failed, it was about 40 years old. But the values have been really strong in the organization and served the organization really well. But it was going through rapid growth, and they were actually bringing in whole teams from other banks, other financial institutions. And they just assumed that the values were landing and that the way that things were happening in the culture was understood and everybody was on the same page. But they hadn't really done that diagnostic to see if that was really the case. And actually, they had a sort of a faux AMI, if you like, which is they had the engagement survey was saying that everything was fine. Everything's fine. So we don't need to look at values. We don't need to look at performance because everything's fine. Our engagement tells us that everything's fine. Of course, we know that everything isn't fine. But I think for me, the starting point is to have that really meaningful organization conversation at the senior level, but not to ignore culture. Because if you're trying to create change, you need to know the size of the change that you're trying to create. Otherwise, nothing's going to, you're not going to create the performance that you want.
You're so right. This whole thing about leading culture and leading performance. One of the things that I really enjoy doing with senior leadership teams is moving them beyond managing performance into leading it. So many of them will have grown up and they'll have had their management training as they've grown up through their development years, and they'll have learned how to have performance conversations. They've learned how to set objectives. They've learned lots of those things. And then they get to the top and they think, well, that's what we need everybody else to do. And because at the executive leadership team, there's less focus on individual targets and goals that haven't been set by the board at a kind of organizational level, quite often the people least likely to have a really good performance conversation are the senior leadership team. And it's a lucky chief exec who gets proper support from their board or their trustees or their organizational kind of governance to really support and help them, which is another reason why bringing in people from outside can really support them